systems go. Clear for liftoff.
Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy, GS Luke, here with our Round 2 live stream for the Genesis Invitational. Going to break down everything you guys need for your showdown lineups tomorrow. With any questions down there in the live chat, a little weather report, some contest selection, as well as lineup construction towards the end to go ahead and tie it all together. So any player questions that you've got, feel free to go ahead and throw those down in the chat. Whether you want to deep dive on them, maybe an ownership and idea heading into tomorrow, I'm all ears over here on this side. You see we got Alan down there in chat. Hopefully you're having a fantastic Thursday, and I appreciate the kind words there, and welcome on in Sites as well, who looks like he had a little bit of a sweat going towards the end of today. But let's talk through what we saw on the golf course, which was really the tale of two halves. The first half of play played 1.4 over par. Remember that it is a no-cut event, or maybe no cut in parentheses without any sort of weather waves out there. Played 1.7 shots harder between the first and second half. So that was mostly due to the rain that they had come through, but also the wind gusts that got a little bit more significant as the day went on. Now, part of this is variance. You always get that when you have a small field like this, but if you were watching the last 2, maybe even 2.5 hours of play, it was significantly more difficult, both from the temperature standpoint. That went down quite significantly. And if you ended up stacking the first half of tee times today, you probably did pretty well over there in Showdown, which I would say it wasn't that obvious that the first half was going to play well. I don't play round 1 Showdown, so it really didn't impact my process all that much, but I do show you guys these averages, the split between the morning and the afternoon, to show you that even with a 2-hour spread of tee times, you're looking at the first hour versus the second hour, right? When we split this by quote unquote wave, any sort of edge, even if it's only for an hour or two, matters at this sort of golf course. So when we take a look at these forecasts over there for Friday, they do look a little bit more tame in general, going to be a little bit calmer than what you had for today, but they're also a little bit more consistent. But I do want to go back to these averages to show you that if maybe tomorrow morning we end up having these forecasts change, you want to be able to adjust for it, because it could lead to quite a big edge for Showdown. So in terms of your forecasts, they look a little bit calmer in the morning. This is the HRRR forecast that we have up right here. And you can see in the morning, it's closer to 9, maybe 10 miles an hour sustained. And then towards the very end of play, it gets closer to 12 to 15 miles an hour. And the wind gusts go from closer to 14, 15 miles an hour to closer to 19 to 20 towards the end of the day. Now, if we go through a few of the other models on here, you're going to see a similar trend. This NEM model has a little bit of midday rain, and also the winds kicking up as the day goes on. The morning closer to 8, maybe 10 miles an hour. Afternoon closer to 11, 12. Medio blue looks a lot of the same as well. Not that rain that you had for the NEM, but a consistent uproar when it comes to the wind gusts. If you go to the icon, same story, same thing with GFS and ECM. The one thing I'll note about this ECM model than this GFS model is that they're calling for the same kind of wind dynamic, but also some rain earlier in the day. So this is kind of, I would say, a sub-ideal situation, because if we had the rain late in the day and the wind gusts kicking up, it'd be the same situation as today, where you had that 1.5 shot advantage. Unfortunately, because tomorrow it looks like the rain might be earlier out there throughout the rounds, the later guys that also have the higher wind gusts are going to get to avoid some of that rain. So rather than having a massive difference between morning and afternoon, I think it's going to be a lot more flat out there for round 2. Now we circle back and I show you guys some of these averages on a recap, just so that tomorrow morning, right, if this ends up flipping, which, by the way, today, this morning, the weather forecast changed quite a bit out there before lock. You want to be able to adjust for it. So, for example, if tomorrow it looks like the wind gusts are going to be higher in the morning than the afternoon, then maybe you want to stack some of those later starters because of this rain, which I know it doesn't look all that significant, right? It's like 1/100th of an inch per hour. That's essentially what it was today. It wasn't raining overly hard. Most of the quote-unquote hard rain is going to be coming in overnight. You can see over there from about 9 local time to about midnight, it looks like it's going to be pretty severe when it comes to the precipitation. But even this little bit of a gust, this little bit of a drizzle that you have there on Friday morning, if it's that and some morning winds, that's when you might want to go out there and attack one side versus the other. But I'll say as of right now, it looks relatively flat. This HRRR is the one that I trust the most out of these 5-6 models, and it doesn't have that much rain there during the morning. In fact, the only rain that you have on this HRRR is going to be about 7 a.m. local time, which is about 2 hours before they actually tee off. So that's why I don't think that there's a massive edge, right? This HRRR model, if anything, I would say would favor the morning guys, whereas this GFS and ECM model, you might go after some later starters to try and avoid a lot of that rain. So just, play it by ear. If you have access to windy.com, that'd be the ideal situation. But even if you don't, wake up, check weather.com, check Willy Weather, check all those other wind sites that they have out there. I know we like to make fun of Wind Finder around here a little bit because that's the site du jour for a lot of your slapdick touts. But you can use it, right? It's not like it's a complete, something that you can't use out there in your process. It's just that if you can afford windy.com and the subscription over here, if you're a rich mother father, as my guy DJN75 would say, it's well worth the investment if you're over here playing lineups. So nothing definitive that we can say as of right now, but something to keep in the back of your mind because of the kind of split that is possible. Your tee times are the same as round number 1. So if we go over here to the round 2 tee times, they're starting at 9:30 local time, 12:30 over here on the East Coast, and your last tee time is going to be at 2:31 Eastern time. So 2 hours and 1 minute between the first and last tee times, and they're going off of holes 1 and 10 once again. So it kind of limits the weather edge that we can go after, but I've seen crazy stuff happen, right? We've seen these weather forecasts completely change overnight. If we get a little bit of a different situation, then maybe this tee time tab comes a little bit more important than it was before. Before we talk about some player questions down there in chat, they go through some of the shots gained metrics, some of the stuff we're looking for in players out there tomorrow. I do want to go over some of this lineup, some of the contest selection that we have for tomorrow. So you have your big $25 GBP up here, this 150 max contest. It's about 20% to first place, 20% to first place. So not my favorite kind of GPP, especially the $25 GPP. Even for pro like me, that's a steep buy-in. They go out there and 150 max for every single slate. The $5 GPP is essentially the same. It's also, you have a fifth going to first place, but it is a more realistic buy-in. So my 150 max exposure is probably going to be like 50 to 100 lineups over here in the $5 GBP. But the main contests that I think if you're watching this that you should be looking at are most of these single entry contests, because unless you're a pro, unless you're somebody that plays PGA DFS very seriously, you're probably not 150 maxing that $5 or that big $25. So if you're entering just one lineup, I think looking for these single entries would make a lot of sense. Like this big 25K single entry, it's a $100 single entry contest, would be perfect out there for tomorrow. It is 20% to first place. So that's kind of like those large field GPPs, but the payout structure is relatively flat after that. Like if you finish in the top 10, you're feeling pretty good about winning, close to $1,000, if not a little bit over $1,000, but that top 10 finish. These kind of contests where you only have to go out there and beat, let's see what this, let me sort this by prizes to make it a little bit easier to find. So that big single entry that I was talking about before, here it is, down here at the 25K, you're only playing against 277 other people. You've got some other single entries to choose from as well. Some of them are a little bit further down the board when it comes to your buy-in, but a lot of those contests are what I'd be focusing on. You're not playing against 10 to 20,000 other entries. And if you're not 150 maxing, let's say only entering a lineup or two, you want to have all the advantage that you can. When you're entering a 150 max contest, not only do you have to beat more entries to go out there and take it home, but you're also playing against people that have more permutations than you, that have more combinations, I guess would be the better way to put it. But they have much more outs than you have as, you're just 5 to 10 lineups, which is why I would focus on some of these other sort of contests. So I like this 18 max. So this would be DGen's baby, as he calls it. This is a $10 18 max. So if you're entering this, it's $180 to go out there and max buy it. So maybe you don't like single entry. Maybe it's a little bit too concentrated for you. If you're looking to multi-enter, like this kind of contest is absolutely ideal. So the one thing I'll say, DraftKings, is that I hate that it keeps resetting. It's screwing up my place when I get out of one of those contests. But that $100 single entry, this $44 contest, it's 12 times 44. So, it's, decent buy-in, a little bit over was it $500 or right about that you're entering to max enter that contest. But if you're entering $400, $500, I would much rather you guys go out there and max enter this 44 times 12 than going out there and entering that same amount of money, that $500. So like 20 lineups in the big $25. You're going to have so much more sustainable results by going to these kind of contests. And I had a few people asking me via DMs for some of the stuff over there with contest selection. And it's huge because depending on your philosophy heading into the slate, depending on what you want out of this kind of slate, you should be going after different kinds of contests. If you're trying to go after the big money, you're trying to play it as more of a gamble, then that big $5 and big $25 GPP, maybe it's okay just to throw a lineup or two in there, right? If you're okay losing money most of the time out there in contests, then it's okay if you just sprinkle in those large field contests. But if you're trying to be more sustainable about it, you care a little bit more about the money that you're putting out there. That's where going to those single entries, those 10, 12, 18 max contests that we pointed out are absolute gold out there for your future. So that's what I'd say about the contest selection. As I said before, I'll be entering quite a few lineups in that $5 GPP, but also I'll have a lineup out there in that $100 single entry, the $200 single entry. If they post one of those, I'll probably go out there and enter. And if I want to add and try and play a little bit heavier for tomorrow, which I haven't quite decided quite yet, this big $250 for max could be an option as well. It'd be $1,000 to go out there and max enter this thing, but the payout structure is still a little bit top heavy. It's still a fifth out there to first place, but you finish in the top 10 in a contest of just a few hundred entries, and you're winning a couple grand, up to like $3,000 to $5,000 right there. So, don't get me wrong. It's still tough to go out there and top 5, top 10 in some of these GPPs, but you're going to have a much better ability or much better chance to go out there and do so if you're playing against a couple hundred entries with your single entry, as opposed to, let's see in the big $5 for tomorrow, how many entries it is. Let's get this. It's not letting me scroll for some reason. It is nearly 12,000 entries. And the big $5 and your big $25 is just a few entries less than that. So obviously, you see people taking down those contests, but it's worth noting that most of those are 150 maxers, and they're not going after it with a single bullet. Let me catch up on chat, see what's going on. What's going on, Nick? You're in joint 6th in the lottery. You always do an edge lineup. Any suggestions on this? So not really sure what you mean by an edge lineup. So if you let me know what you mean, I got you. It is a whole lot of fun though, Nick. So you're talking about the event. Yeah, dude, I like seeing these players tested. I like seeing guys shooting over par. I'm a decent golfer myself, but single-digit handicap, I'm lucky to break 80 at a hard golf course. So it's nice to see these guys that are +5s to +10s in a few cases out there with their handicap go out there and shoot something over par. It makes me feel a little bit better about how I play. So it's going to be that way for at least one more day. We'll have to see about the weekend. Does Finau and Dietrich bounce back? So I'll give you their shots gained metrics. I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't tell you if they're going to go out there and bounce back. The shots gained metrics for Dietrich today were negative across the board. So as DGen always says, or he could in terms of a guy coming back, but not the best stat profile. Then the other one was who? You were looking at a Tony Finau. Finau's got good course history, so he has that going for him. And the stat profile looks pretty similar, but a little bit better with the ball striking. He was slightly positive off the tee and on approach. Neither one strikes me as the kind of guy that played well today, but as you said, they need a bounce back. So could they? For sure. I think especially Finau, who has the good course history, but time will only tell if they're able to do so. No one knows ahead of time, right? What's going on, Tommy? Welcome on in. And we're having a good night ourselves, so hopefully you are as well. I got some water here, and my mouth is getting a little bit dry. Now you want some ruffles. I do want some ruffles myself. That sounds pretty good. You're hedging. Okay, so I see what you're saying over there. So you're saying you want to hedge some of your lineups? I'm not usually somebody that does that, Nick. But if you're 6 in the big lottery, so that's what you were saying before, like you're in a pretty good spot right now. I think you're just way too early in the process to be thinking about that. If you were in Sunday Showdown and you were in the top 5 of the lottery, that sort of thing, especially if you're winning, you're up by like 10, 15 points out there in the lottery, then maybe you hedge out on Sunday. You fade your highest exposure guy towards the top, that kind of thing, and you let it ride with Sunday. But yeah, round 2 is way too early, in my opinion, to be thinking about that sort of thing. So any suggestions? My suggestion would be is to look at it as its own slate. Like, it's so early in the week, especially because it's not a true no-cut event, but you're going to have most of the field making it to the weekend. There's just so much room for variance. So I would probably advise against that. How good would Tony Finau be if he had the clubs that actually fit him? Yeah, they look like little toothpicks out there, huh? He must like them, though, so I don't think it's that big a deal. Dietrich coming in off the W, maybe in cruise control. That was the idea with me, Nick. I didn't play him this week, full transparency, mostly because of him going into cruise control. You know, it's one thing when you're a Scotty Scheffler. You go out there and win. Next week, it's probably not going to impact you whatsoever. When you're somebody who gets their first big boy win, I mean, he didn't win on the DP World Tour. And he goes out here, wins on the PGA Tour. It just hits a little bit differently than it does with guys like Scotty. So I agree with you there. You tend not to ever play your guys in main so you don't jinx yourself. Yeah, hey, if that's your thing, go ahead and do so. But I don't let any of that silly stuff get in the way. I try and what I try and do is I try and take every slate as its own. The only time I incorporate a sort of like self hedge is on Sundays. Like I was saying before, but rounds 2 and 3, I play it like it's a completely clean slate. So let's take a look at these shots gained metrics. So before we go out there and talk about some lineup construction, when I'm doing out there with my lineups, let's go through some of the process of building a player pool. The contest selection is a big part of your long-term ROI. The actually putting together lineups is a whole nother process. But the third part of that is figuring out who the hell you're going to go out there and play. And the shots gained metrics aren't everything. That's why we have tools like the Stone to go out there and take a look at some other stuff. Those would include your round 2 historical, which, by the way, this is the main slate Stone, so it's not going to be updated over there for Showdown quite yet. But your round 2 historical, that'll be really important to go out there and look at. You can take a look at some of your guys that have good bad round regression, right? So guys that historically, that after a sketchy round, to go out there and turn it around, which I would say that the round 2 historical, always something to go out there and incorporate. But that bad round regression is especially live tomorrow because of the scoring average. The scoring average was more than 2 strokes over par. And you had guys, especially in the second half of tee times, right, this half that was playing a hole 3 over par, that got completely massacred out there. I mean, they shot like 4 or 5 over par, and some of that was unavoidable. Some of it was just not being lucky when it came to conditions. Some of it was lie based with going out there and missing fairways. I mean, sometimes you'd miss a fairway today and you'd have a perfect lie, like Rory, right, who was able to get a bunch of spin out of the rough. And then there were certain lies where if you hit it in the rough, maybe only missed by a foot or two, you got absolutely shafted. So on a day like this where it played super hard, you had a lot of, scrappy rounds out there. I think it'd be the best way to put it. That bad round regression over there on the round 2 Stone is going to be massive because you have players out there that, I mean, they're going to have to go out there and grind. They're going to have to go out there and reset day to day, wipe the slate clean, take a look at the guys that have the best ability of doing so. And that's another way to go out there and look after players. But the other aspect of what you do to build a player pool is to take a look at the stats from round number 1. Now, for Sunday Showdown, these are a little bit more valuable than they will be for today. Sunday Showdown, we'll have 3 rounds to look at to go out there and evaluate players. After 18 holes, we don't have a whole lot to look at here. So, we're going to go through some of the ball striking poppers, guys that maybe got a little bit lucky with the putter, et cetera, et cetera. But this is only just one data point to use. It's only an 18-hole sample size of golf. Golf is already extremely variant, extremely chaotic. Don't overreact after an 18-hole sample size. So let's take a look at these. So your top ball strikers, your top approach players today, Sam Stevens, Jaeger, Scheffler, up there towards the top. Of course, Scotty was after some of those really close iron shots he was hitting. The guys like Billy Ho, Hovland, Thompson, all up there towards the top. All players that get a slight bump over there in my modeling. Doesn't mean that these guys are all locks over there in lineups, but, compared to guys that maybe were closer to neutral or losing with their iron play, if you give me 50-50 ownership on one of these guys ball striking the ball well versus somebody that was a little bit more sketchy with that ball striking round 1, the clear tiebreaker for me is to go with the better ball striker. So this top end of the board definitely gets that kind of advantage. You'd say the same thing about off the tee. So we can take a look at some of the off the tee poppers as well. So Sam Burns really drove the ball well today, hit 85% of his fairways, not something that we always see. So it was clearly dialed in that aspect of his game. Guys like Davis Thompson not only gained off the tee, but we mentioned he also gained over 2 strokes on approach there before. Now, a guy like Thompson, even Burns at T7, these kind of guys that are in the top 10 after round number 1, they're going to get an artificial bump in ownership because of their position on the board. So these kind of guys, they may carry some ownership, but you find a Benny Ann here, right? He kind of looks like a little bit more of a diamond in the rough, right? He gained a bunch off the tee, but he lost nearly 2 strokes around the green. This is the kind of player that likely finds his way into my player pool because he's going to be lower owned, maybe about average to slightly below average owned. And you're talking about somebody that he gained ball striking about a stroke over there in round number 1. And if he's a neutral over there with his short game, then that's a better than average round, if not closer to something like a -2, -3 round, which is great. That's a nearly optimal performance around this kind of golf course. So, just like the approach players, this by no means makes somebody a lock. But when you're comparing somebody that with the ball striking stats, so now let's combine it with the off the tee and approach, these ball striking poppers up here in round number 1, like I said, a good tiebreaker when you're going through your player pool process. So you can look at guys like Akshay. I know we didn't point him out before. Guys like Russell Henley had a really good day. Seamus Power up there towards the top end of the ball striking, and same thing with the Robert McIntyre. Now, when we take a look at the short game, the reason why I want to point this out is a lot of times putting comes down to luck. You can say the same thing about around the green as well, but the players over here to the right that are super dark green in the putting, they don't all get a massive downgrade over there in my projections, but a slight downtick, particularly if they're not a really good putter. Now, guys like Denny, Wyndham Clark, we'd kind of expect them to go out there and gain strokes putting. But when you get down to guys like a Novak, a Lucas Glover isn't the most consistent putter on tour, that's where it becomes a little bit more of a red flag for us. So just like the ball strikers, the guys that were popping with their off the tee play, it by no means means that you have to avoid a Lucas Glover. You have to avoid some of these sketchy guys like Hideki, Sam Stevens that aren't always the best putters on the PGA Tour. But when you're comparing them, let's say that you're doing a 50-50 between somebody like Glover and another mid 6K guy that maybe also hit the ball well but didn't gain all those strokes putting, you might want to consider the guy that was the ball striker as opposed to the guy that gained all those strokes putting. I mean, you can see here with the Glover, right? He lost out there with the approach playing off the tee. Could he turn it around? He's one of the best ball strikers of all time, so yes, he certainly could. But in most cases, especially if you can find a really good ball striking popper, I'm likely going to side in that direction. So that's why we take a look at some of these shots gain metrics. I will take a look at the around the green poppers too. So guys like Willie Z, Sahith Theegala got a little bit lucky when it came to the around the green. You'd expect these guys to come back down to earth a little bit as well. Now the opposite is true. So if you take a look at some of the guys that lost a bunch of strokes putting, you might also want to consider some of these players. Now, Erasmus, who lost nearly 5 strokes on the greens, that is probably not going to happen again, but he did also lose nearly 4 strokes on approach. So he's the ultimate, or he could kind of player, second to last out there on the leaderboard, but was mega chalk heading into this kind of week. So I got to say, it's really tough wanting to play a guy at +10 that has almost no chance to go out there and make the cut. However, he's a high birdie guy. I love Rasmus. You guys probably know this if you've been following my content for a while. I've been singing his praises for quite some time. Large field GPPs in the right kind of format at low ownership, like these kind of guys, you could use at super low ownership. So like Rasmus might not be the best example, but players like an Akshay, Jaeger, like they set up pretty well statistically out there for tomorrow. Guys that gained on approach with Akshay and Jaeger and then lost over there with their putter. But it doesn't mean that they're a lock to go out there and improve, because these kind of guys that lost strokes with the putter, if they fall off with the ball striking, like it could be a really rough day for them. If they fall off the ball striking and then they continue to putt like they did, then that's how you shoot like +5, +6. So these kind of guys that lost a whole bunch of strokes putting, you're probably not using them as a core play tomorrow. But if you're looking for a GPP flyer, which in most cases, these guys towards the bottom end of the putting list, towards the bottom end of the leaderboard, they make sense as GPP flyers. So you can see on here, most of them are like the 40s and 50s when it comes to their current positioning. Heck, some of them are even like T69, T65, or 71, 72. Like you have guys like an Adam Hadman and a Rasmus. So this is more so like your flyer range that you're looking at, but still in play because of good old regression to the mean. You also have the around the green guys that lost a whole bunch of strokes there. Like a Danny List, he is a like borderline amateur player. So I would say that that's not so surprising. But guys like a Grazerman, Matt Fitzpatrick, Finau, Straka, McIntyre towards the top end of the board here, these are the kind of players that, sure, they might lose strokes around the green again, but you'd expect it to be a little bit closer to neutral. So when you're looking for some potential GPP flyers, if you can find some guys that have some short game regression coming, they could be worth adding out there to your player pool. If you go ahead and sort this by the leaderboard and we try and find some of the best candidates for tomorrow, it's always going to be these ball striking guys for me. And if we can combine that with players that lost strokes putting, that's where you can really find that magic. So a few players that kind of fit the mold from the stat profile. A Jaeger, we already pointed him out a few times. A McIntyre also fits the stat profile. But guys like a Billy Ho and Akshay Bhatia are also players that at least should be in consideration for tomorrow. Now, you want to make sure that they're relatively low owned, but guys like an Akshay, Horschel, they're going to be average, if not slightly below average ownership. And same thing on guys like a McIntyre and Jaeger. So there's a good chance that I'm playing all four of those, and you could extend that same kind of thought out there towards the rest end of your player pool. But as I mentioned before, that shouldn't be your only process. You should be looking for some round two historical guys over here on the Stone. That, of course, on the SHIPIT Nation site whenever it gets updated, and some of those bad round regression players. And the other thing to add is if you can find a good bad round regression player, and then you can find one of these guys, like one of these four that we pointed out as having a good stat profile, that's really where you can find the nuts, because then you're looking at guys that usually regress back to their mean quickly, and you've got the stat profile that is set up for that as well. So I don't have that in front of me. I'm going to have to check out the Stone after we get off the live stream. But if one of these four is also going to grade out as, like, let's say an A- or better in that bad round regression, then boy, oh boy, could we be cooking right there. Let's catch up on chat. You know I will, but let's check out Nico on the shots gained metrics. Let's do it, because I didn't catch a look at him quite yet. So gained off the tee and on approach, and then gained out there with the putter. Yeah, a very sustainable kind of shots gained profile. The only thing for Showdown that I think kind of stinks is that he's top 10, right? He's top 7. He almost played too well out there in round number 1. But yeah, in like a single entry, maybe like a smaller field GPP, is definitely usable. I mean, this stat profile is pretty much exactly what we look for, but the issue might be the ownership, because he almost played too well, right, out there at T7. Thanks, Luke, for your help, of course. Does Finau have a good round 2 historically in bad round regression? I don't know that, Nick. I don't have that over there from the SHIPIT Nation Stone. But if you're a part of the SHIPIT Nation site, you'll have that answered for you in probably half an hour to an hour when they post that Stone. You're tempted to put some Hovland in your lineups. His off the tee and approach stats were solid, but his short game was weak. Let's take a look at it, because if what you're saying is accurate, then I think you're spot on. I think you're completely correct. So off the tee gained, he gained over 2 strokes on approach. Yeah, I mean, this is that same kind of stat profile. Maybe it's not as extreme as the guys that were gaining 3 strokes ball striking and then lost over 2 strokes putting, but it's that same kind of idea. And at T20, I think he'll still get played. He's not going to be low owned over there with Hovland, but I think he's a decent guy to consider, that's for sure. What's going on, Joseph? What's going on? Easy bets. And Andy says, give you all the sep. He lost off the tee and around the green today. Let me take a look myself, because he might be onto something like he were over there with Hovland. Let's see, good old Sepp Straka. So he lost across the board. Yeah, I don't know about that. Now, could he regress back to the mean? For sure, but I don't know if the stat profile is really screaming a really good play. What would be the good play about Sepp is that he's got incredible form here in 2025, is playing some of the best golf of anyone in the world, and he's going to be low owned. That'd be the idea with a Sepp Straka. So, I know we had the comment saying that, he lost off the tee and around the green. That's a good thing. You have to pair that up with some other stats, right? You got to have some regression coming back to you. Just keep that in mind when it comes to these, right? Because you can make an argument for anyone if you use that kind of logic, right? You can look at any stat profile and make an argument for somebody if you did so. That's why I give you that pushback. Jose says, do you think Tom Kim looks good for tomorrow? Let's see. It's a good old Tom Kim. So he's one of 3 Kims we have in the field. Gained off the tee, gained on approach. He's got the kind of stat profile that, it's about average across the board. He had a slightly better than average round. It doesn't scream anything to me. It doesn't scream a particularly good stat profile. It also doesn't scream anything negative either. So, I'd rate him like a 6 out of 10. He had a solid round number 1, decent stat profile, but doesn't really scream anything in either direction. If you like the ownership on the Tom Kim, you think that he sets up well for the golf course, then deploy him. I think he makes sense there. Did Sungbae struggle late? He seemed okay early. It seemed like that. I mean, early on, he was up there towards the top end of the board. In terms of your shots gained metrics, he lost about 2 strokes on approach. Let me actually go over here to Data Golf. If you go over here to the live tournament stats, let's take a look at Sungjae and take a closer look at it. So did he start on the front or the back 9? I guess is the question. I guess we can double check on that over here with Sungjae M. Because I want to give you an answer, right, to what it looked like on his second 9. So he started on hole number 1. Okay, so that's good to know. So this back 9 over here, the reason why I brought up this live tournament stats tab is I'm going to look at the approach, because the front 9, especially towards the back end of his front 9, he gained on his approach in 4 of his 5 holes. And then on this back 9 here, lost a third of a stroke, lost a fourth of a stroke. His off the tee wasn't even the issue. Back 9, he actually drove the ball particularly well. His iron play seemed to kind of deteriorate as the day went on, but it's worth noting that he was playing on the harder side of conditions. So just like we were looking at earlier with these stat averages where it played 1.7 strokes harder out there in the afternoon, that could have also been the issue for Sungjae. So I don't know if I would look into that too much, Nick, just because the course was kind of playing against him. That could have been the reason for that. But yeah, he did fall off rather quickly. How's your boy Poston looking? It's a good question. Let's take a look, huh? So good old JT Poston. I know he had a rough round. That's for damn sure. But he rallied towards the end of it. He ended up being just a slight negative when it comes to the shots gained. And made birdie on 2 of his last 6 holes, it looks like. So the stat profile actually looks pretty good. He looks better than I thought he was going to. That's for damn sure. Gaining off the tee and then gaining with his approach play. The only worry I have with Poston personally, and this is just me, right? Obviously, do whatever you guys want. But Poston is a little bit of a sketchy driver, and this is a driver-heavy golf course. But the stats looked pretty good today. What a round. Thank you for the over on strokes, of course. And it was nice over there for our free slip. We'll try and run it back over on my stream later on. Thoughts on Thigala? Usually solid in round 2. So yeah, if that's your lean over there, if that's the stand you're going to take with his round 2 historical, then I like that more than just picking names out of a hat. I'll say PD, I bet, Sahith outright this week. So I'm not going to give you any pushback there. I think he fits this golf course quite well. Is there any way, aside from checking every player manually, to see if anyone went bogey free or had a birdie streak? Well, the birdie streak stuff, not going to be as easy to check, but if you're a part of Bet the Number over here, they have all the bogeys are worse to the right. So BOB is birdies are better. This bogeys are worse, or how many bogeys are worse were made. And there were no bogey-free rounds today. And at least to my knowledge, there weren't any birdie streaks that anyone had. Now, that's the one I'm a little bit more sketchy on. I do know for a fact that there were no bogey-free rounds. But yeah, Bet the Number is probably the best way to get it. But, unless you're a member there, it's not that easy to do so. Is there any way, aside from checking? Oh, yeah, you already asked. Hey, by the way, you can just ask things once. You don't need to do so twice. I'll definitely see you down there in chat. Don't worry about it. All right, let's go through some lineup construction now. So over here on the lineup construction side, it's not like Sunday Showdown where we really have to harp on trying to get placement points. It's a lot easier to go out there and build lineups. So what I mean by that is that you have less going through your mind. When you're building lineups on a Sunday Showdown slate, you're really having to think about script. You're going out there like who's winning, who's finishing in the top 5, that sort of thing. Our round 2 lineups are mostly centered around our ownership. So in that big $5, $25 GPP, you've really got to be thinking about getting different to the field. So personally for me, I'm going to have some 150 max exposure. It's probably only going to be like 75 lineups though over there on the $5 tomorrow. Those kind of lineups for me are going to really have to get different to the field, whether that's setting a product ownership cap, whether it's going out there and setting a role to only have so many guys over 10, 12% ownership. Those are the kind of things you need to be doing in the large field GPP. Now, when I'm entering my single entries, I'm thinking about this lineup construction just a little bit less. But what we're going to do for our lineups here together is we're going to build a lineup or two for the large field GPP, because you can take the same kind of strategy that we're about to talk about and use it in your single entries by, again, focusing on the ownership just a little bit less. So in our large field GPPs, where you're starting up top is almost always going to have ownership. And I haven't quite ran my personal projections yet. As you guys guys know I run my own site outside of SHIPIT Nation, and my projections towards the top, I can tell you, I was doing a rough draft before we got on the live stream here, and it's relatively spread out. Guys like Hideki, I have slightly lower owned, and I'm just going to emphasize the slightly part because I've still got them over 10%. Same thing with guys like a Cantley and Fleetwood that really suffered in the harder conditions towards the latter half of the day. But even those sort of players, I've got at least like 8 to 10% owned, in most cases in that 10 to 13 to 14% range. So up top, pretty much no matter who you play, you're going to be taking some sort of ownership, which means if you like a Scotty after his round today, like you could still use him if you wanted to. But up top, it's more so of just kind of playing your guys. So for the sake of this, I'm going to throw a Rory into the lineup. Really no particular reason why I'm picking Rory there, other than the fact that I think he's primed for a little bit of a bounce back, and that'll be slightly lower owned than guys like a Scotty Scheffler. So up top, like I said, you don't want to get too cute with the ownership. The more important aspect is what we're going to do towards the middle to the bottom end of the board. So for our second man in, I'm going to throw in a Fleetwood. We'll go with the double Englishman to start this. I guess one Englishman, one Northern Irishman over there with Rory McIlroy. And that's a pretty chalky start to your lineup. Like even though Tommy Fleetwood's there at T40, everyone 8K plus is going to be getting some kind of ownership. So this might not be the chalkiest start that we have in history, but we're still going to have to offset this ownership down towards the bottom. So with our 8K range player, you could probably still take some ownership if you wanted to, but this is personally where I'm going to start to try and get a little bit different. So guys like a Jason Day that are +3 T40, right, didn't have his best stuff. You're talking maybe even sub 10% ownership on that sort of player. Here in the 7K range, I don't hate the idea of trying to take some pivots down here as well, because it's not like I'm that worried about duplicating myself. Like it's only 12,000 entries in that $5 and $25 tomorrow, which isn't the most by any means. However, I want leverage in my lineups. And I know that golf, especially an 18-hole showdown slate, is extremely variant. You're going to have just the most variance, the most noise you can possibly think of in a sport like this on golf. And that's for full round events, like 4 rounds, 72 holes. You're going to get all that variance, let alone when it's just one day of golf. So, down here in that 7K range, I'm not only want to make sure that, I'm not duplicating, as I said, but I want to be able to move up these leaderboards when my guys hit. So I know that guys like Clark, I bet him outright this week. Fantastic start to the week. Great. But I don't love him for showdown tomorrow, because if I'm going to use him, I'm going to be sharing him with like double amount of lineups as some of the other guys around him. So Berger, for example, like he was a pretty chalky player this week. He spun his wheels out there in round number 1, and I don't think he's going to get all that ownership. I'd prefer him over guys like a Wyndham Clark. Down here in the 6K range, you could say a lot of the same kind of things, but like in general, like a Glover shot -1, pretty decent round. Like a Davis Thompson, right? We were looking at the shots gained metrics before. I'd rather take shots on these guys that are a little bit lower owned. So, Woodland, right? He was chalk heading into this kind of week. I've got to say, like, the Rory Berger Woodland train of guys that kind of spun their wheels after being chalk this week could be a really good way to go out there and attack this kind of slate. The reason I say that is there's a reason why they were chalk. They were grading out well. All of them had really good form heading into this kind of event. And if people are going to completely jump ship just because of one stale performance, then I'll take advantage of that psychological factor, because, if there's one thing that you can really exploit when it comes to playing those GPPs, are that a lot of PGA DFS players are just soft, right? They have no backbone. They have one losing day. They have one set of 18 holes where something doesn't go their way, and they act emotionally after that 18 holes. The more you've been doing this, the better ability you're going to have to be able to separate that and be more stoic when it comes to your process. But that is key, especially for round 2 showdown. Like, as I was mentioning with these shots gained metrics, you can't overreact to the 18-hole sample size. So when it comes to my large field GPP exposure, I'm getting very different when it gets to my ownership. I mean, large field GPPs, I'm already trying to get different to the field, but when it comes to rounds 2 and 3 showdown, just add that on steroids, right? Go out there and pump it up even more. And that's what I'm doing out there with my lineup construction. Now, as I previously mentioned, if you're in a single entry, a smaller field GPP, you don't have to be as crazy about it. You don't have to go out there and get as different to the field. So maybe you do take some more popular players there in that 7 and 8K range, but getting different and having that leverage to the field is always important and always something that you want to be going after out there in these showdown formats. So that's it. That's all I've got over here for this live stream. I'm going to go over any last second questions that you've got down there in chat, but I need you guys to smash the like button if you guys haven't already, and also subscribe so you guys don't miss any of the streams out there for rounds 3 and 4. Is Hovland due for a decent round? Don't like to say that guys are due, but I will go over the shots gained metrics with you. As previously mentioned, really good on approach and solid off the tee. So I would say that the stat profile looks particularly good. Rory's round could have been like 4 shots worse. You'll love him for tomorrow. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, he had that one shot out of the rough. That was really good. I just think he's going to go off because it always happens, right? The super popular guys from main slate. I mean, he was 40% owned this week. He was way higher owned than I thought he was going to be over there for main slate. They always smash right before the cut line. And if he doesn't smash tomorrow, you can bet his ass that he's going to go out there and do it for round 3. So I'm there with you. What do I think the winning score is going to be? Way too early to be asking that, PD. 15 under, something like that. I think with the conditions getting easier as the week goes on, that you're going to see some guys start to take it low. Weird Data Golf has struck a gaining 1 stroke on approach today. Your site shows I'm losing. It's not my site. This is Bet the Number. So just full transparency there, right? And let's go over to Data Golf and check that, right? Maybe you were looking at some old data. Maybe I was looking at some old data. Yeah, they have them gaining a stroke on approach. It's interesting. Yeah, there is a little bit of a discrepancy there. Just to check on Sepp Straka. I don't know which one's right. I don't run either site, so I couldn't tell you, right? I don't go through the modeling myself. Hit the like button, fools. You heard the guy. I'm not going to call you guys fools, though. You guys are absolutely awesome down there in the live chat. Can't wait for 30% of people to get the Patrick Rogers experience. Oh, God. Yeah, I got to say, hell of a call by DGen out there on Patrick Rogers so far. But, and it's a huge but, guys, showdown tomorrow, Nick gave you the red flag. Nick gave you the warning there because he's probably not shooting -3 again tomorrow. But I do hope he shoots like even par or like maybe like 1 over tomorrow, because in 1 over, by the way, would be a pretty good round around this golf course, probably gaining strokes to the field, because I played a hell of a lot of Patrick Rogers this week. So I hope he keeps it going. But for showdown, yeah, I probably won't have any. Ricky Fowler is the gift that keeps on giving. Yeah, he sucks, doesn't he, huh? At least sucks here in 2025. I got to say, I hate to see it because I'm a big fan of his, but he'll turn it around at some point. If Victor could play golf half decently around the green, you still like him for tomorrow? Yeah, dude. We showed the shots gained metrics before. The whole leaving Joe Mayo thing, I don't know. The shots gained metrics, they don't look that great, Victor. I don't know if you should have left your guy Joe Mayo there. It's not even just this event, right? I mean, look at this. I didn't know it was going to be this bad, guys. Look at his around the green. And this is after he left his coach that he uses for around the green. He starts losing like 2-3 shots gained around the green per event. Yeah, dude, you're spot on. If he could just chip, he'd be a half decent player. But that's all I've got, guys. I'm going to go ahead and hop on out of here. I appreciate you guys stopping by as per usual. Let's go out there, ship a GPP or 2. Let's go out there and find our names towards the top end of those contests. And I'll see you guys out there for the live stream tomorrow night.